Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami. This is our maybe fourth or fifth week of these. Could it be that long? Anyway, here we are again. Good morning to all of you. Let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Open our hearts, strengthen our minds, give us willpower and clarity, that we may feel your inner guidance, and that we may move with steadfast courage into thy infinite light. Om. Peace. Amen. I'm going to do something today that I don't advise anyone else to do, or let me phrase it differently. I advise people not to do exactly what I'm about to do. I'm going to talk beyond my portfolio. I usually advise my friends when they're beginning their lifelong opportunity to share these teachings, don't ever try to talk beyond what you actually know, because you get yourself in trouble. It's a very important principle of sharing these teachings is the law of holes, H-O-L-E-S, which you may well know, which is when you find yourself in one, stop digging. So, but this is an idea, these are ideas that I've been trying to understand myself very intently, maybe for the last decade. And it was part of writing the book about Swami Kriyananda, and tomorrow is Swami's Moksha Day. April 21st is the day that Swami Kriyananda left his body. Moksha means spiritual liberation. So it seems fitting. And the title that we're using is Fulfillment, Heartbreak, Surrender. And it was brought powerfully to my mind because a very, very dear friend left his body on Friday evening, just before midnight. It wasn't related to the virus. He'd had a degenerative condition, as it happened in his lungs, but it still wasn't the virus. And it just reached the end point. He was a couple of years older than I, so it wasn't premature, except for the fact that we would like him still to be with us. Even though I haven't lived closely with him, he was he and his wonderful wife, this is Brian Powers and his wonderful wife, Lisa. They were founding members of the Palo Alto community, and we were very good friends. A number of years ago, they moved to the village, and even though we kept in touch, the daily contact wasn't there after they went to live somewhere else. But his death really broke my heart. I was impressed. I honestly don't know of any other death that hit me as hard as this one. My parents, it just ripped me up a lot. I'm recovering, and I was happy for him. His body was impossible. He'd had a wonderful life. I mean, just a huge outpouring of appreciation. He had a beautiful wife, 40 plus years, but it just somehow, I really felt his absence. And, people are talking to each other over the internet as we do, and commiserating with Lisa, who, took wonderful care of him all the way through, but in the last years especially. If you don't love completely, then your heart doesn't break. But if you love completely, and in the inevitable end of whatever it is that you have become attached to comes, your heart breaks. And then after your heartbreak, you have to realize that you have no choice but to surrender to it. So how this relates to Swami Kriyananda is this. I watched Swamiji be more realistic about the nature of life than I had any capacity to be. And in fact, I would rebel against things he would say sometimes about basically how much sorrow and suffering there is in the world. I just kept insisting that everything was going to work out. And he would not drive the point home, but it was just clear that he knew that things in this world generally don't. Or if they do work out, they just work out for a little bit of time. And insofar as our enjoyment of them is separate from our inner enjoyment of God, then heartbreak is inevitable. But even the word heartbreak, you see, to my mind, always conjured up a great deal of fear. And one of the things that I understood about Swamiji is that he was already at surrender. And surrender this is simply what is. And on the other side of trying to make the world different is the actual bliss that we're seeking. I was in Israel in January. As many of you know, I helped lead 2 different pilgrimage groups. And I experienced in Israel the Sabbath, where the whole country shuts down on Friday night and doesn't open up again until Saturday night or usually till Sunday morning. And when I came back home, somebody sent me a little book about the Sabbath, and from which I got this idea, which I later read in a poem, so I guess it's a common idea. Most of the time in our lives, we are always trying to influence the world. We're trying to earn a living, we're trying to feed our children, we're trying to develop our creative skills, we're trying to make relationships, we're always trying to make something happen. Much of that is God-inspired and required of us. As the Bhagavad Gita said, inaction is a form of action. So we have to act in this world. Our karma compels us, and it's how we learn. But on the Sabbath, we stop acting, and we simply allow the world to be. And for 1 day a week, is the way it's described, we just live in whatever God gives us. And I remember talking to an Orthodox Jewish woman, and of course by now people have all these workarounds. Like you're not allowed to work, so therefore you can't turn on your light switch. But if you turn it on before the Sabbath starts, you can leave it on through the whole Sabbath. So this one woman commented, I forgot to turn on certain lights, so I just had to live in the dark for that Sabbath. And she said, I guess God wanted me to live in the dark. But the point is that we don't influence, we merely accept. Well, most of us intensely influence, or at least influence with our desires. The way Ananda Village is constructed, the building, which is now the Hansa Temple, is halfway up a hill. And there used to be a porch outside that, and you could look down and you could see what we call downtown Ananda. And when I lived there in the 70s, that building was the publications building, and that's where I worked. And every noontime, we'd come out, we'd sit on that patio, and when the weather was good, and we'd meditate out there. There's certain classic photographs if you see a bunch of scraggly, hippie-looking kids sitting there with their legs hanging over, meditating on that half-finished building. No railing, just no railing at all. We just sat there. But I remember vividly, I was sitting on that railing, must have been after meditation, because I was looking down at the downtown Ananda. The market is here, the road was here, and there was the father of a child that I knew very well, a couple that I knew well. The daughter was maybe 5 years old, absolutely adorable child, bright, energetic, about as lovely as she could be. Daddy gets out of his car over here. Child sees Daddy over there. And all the way up here I could hear her. She starts shrieking in her little child voice, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And then in her adorable self, she runs this whole distance and just flings herself into his arms. And he holds her like this. So of course it practically brought tears to my eyes. It was so dear. But it also brought tears to my eyes because she's going to grow up. And how could he not, draw happiness from that little child? And I had an experience with my own father that sometimes I can't, it's still hard for me to talk about this. My father and I were very close. he was very interesting to me, and I was very interesting to him. And starting from whenever I began to be able to talk, which was probably when I came out of the womb, I think my sister and I were joking. I think I came out of the womb and, commented to the doctor about the delivery room and what the delivery had been like and what my experience of the womb had been and how it differed from other experiences of the womb, just on and on. If I didn't start then, I started as soon as I possibly could. And my father and I liked to talk to each other. And, I was really close with him, and he really enjoyed it. I was an enjoyable person. I waited for him when he came home from work. We would talk in the evenings, it was a big thing. Then I went to college. I went for 1 year when I was what would I have been, 18. I came back home intending to spend the summer in their house. But it soon became obvious that they thought they could still set rules for me. And I was already living on my own, and I just wasn't interested in their rules. And my father, unfortunately, gave me an ultimatum, which I'm sure he regretted. So I just moved out. But I remember sitting at the table with my father. Oh, dear. And he began to cry. Because it was over. It was just over. I wasn't going to be his little girl anymore. But I knew I wasn't born to be his daughter. I was born for another life, and I couldn't give my life to him. So I didn't. I moved out. I never moved back. Oh, dear. You see? But the heartbreak wasn't because we were disappointed. The heartbreak is because we did get what we wanted. But nothing in this world stays the same. Because the only eternal fulfillment is with God. Now, you see, for most people, they become sad. And what I saw in Swamiji was that he was so much more realistic he was so much more accepting and perceptive of what was true. But he also was capable of knowing on the other side of that. But you see, he didn't deny the heartbreak. The way for much of my life, and even the way I perceived him, was I needed to deny the heartbreak because I was so frightened of it. But I didn't understand that we will cling until on some very, very deep level, we realize that it's not going to work. It's as simple as that. If it worked, it would be fine. If we could actually do it. Master said that the reason we reincarnate over and over and over again is not because life is so terrible, but because it almost works. It just almost works. Darn it, that darling little daughter who ran across screaming my name and jumped into my arms, this time we're going to go into business together. We're going to live together the whole time. This time she won't die of a childhood illness. This time I won't become a drunkard and somehow get alienated from her. I'm just going to straighten out those last little details, and then it's going to be okay. So we come back and we try to shift it just a little, and then we try to shift it just a little, and then we try to shift it just a little. And after a very long time, we realize that the whole system is off. Now, but God wants us to give our lives completely. In the song of Swamiji's that's called Go On Alone, which of course is such a call to renunciation. You can find it on the internet. It's just everywhere. The title says it all. What if men cry, your dream is not our own, your soul knows the answer, go on alone. And, we just sing it with so much in my sort of, what I call it, my self-protective Kshatriya warrior, just has always loved that song. But there's a few lines in that song that I pretended not to hear for a really long time. Give life your heart. Bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving, all this world's your own. Make rich the soil, but once the seed is sown, and whatever the line is, I can't remember, go on alone, go on alone. But you see, we're not going on alone. We're walking into the light. And everything that we love, everyone that we love, every experience that we love, all we were ever experiencing in that was the love of God. We just didn't know it. It was put to me this way once. We look out at the world and the whole world is made of tinfoil, even though we can't actually tell or see that it's made of tinfoil. Do we have a difficulty? Even though we can't tell or see that it's made of tinfoil, but it seems to shine with its own light. And because it's shining with its own light, we're reaching out for that light because we think that that is the source of the brightness that we see. And we don't understand that it's our inner light hitting those shiny objects and coming back to us. And then we begin to realize not that there's no beauty there. You see, this is how a mistaken idea of renunciation begins to deal with it, is that we begin to try to say that it's not attractive, that it's not shiny, that it's not beautiful, that I don't want what I see. And usually when we're saying that, that's to cover our own disappointment. Somebody said once that the mere fact of being disappointed indicates that we still want it. So when Swamiji was a young disciple with Master, he asked him the question, he said, since the idea is to transcend any attraction to this world, why wouldn't people who commit suicide be liberated? And Master, he laughed. He didn't laugh about people committing suicide by any means, but he laughed because the reasoning was not valid. He said, it's not enough to repudiate this world. He said, there also must be dynamic love for God. And we have to practice that dynamic love for God in our experiences of this world. Now, I remember that at a certain point, very early in my spiritual life, there were two people who were extremely important to me. One of whom I loved wholeheartedly, more than really I'd hardly loved anyone in my life. Not romantic love, it was a woman friend. The other one I had a deep karmic aversion to. We'd had many difficult past lives together, and we were both of us carrying the memories of a lot of negativity from the past, and neither of us was able to discern the past from the present. Eventually, Swami helped harmonize the relationship by pointing out that indeed both of us had been pretty scummy in the past toward each other, but that neither of us would do that ever again. We'd learned, we'd suffered, and so we needed to be able to tell the past from the present. But I came up with this theory, and I said to Swami, the problem is not that I dislike this one. The problem is that I love this one too much. So if I loved this one less, then it would balance it out, and I would come closer to even-minded. I'm not sure if it was on that occasion when Swami said this to me, but this is what I remember. He said, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, or the equivalent of that. And he said, great love, the capacity to feel great love for someone, anyone, anything, your dog, your cat, your houseplants, your garden, the capacity to feel great love is to show us what we are capable of doing so that we will raise all of our relationships to that level. You see, it's just the opposite of, oh, I'm afraid of having my heart broken, so I'm just going to stay small. It's just the opposite, because what we have to do is we have to love God through everything, and we have to love everything with the love of God. And then we have to realize, I have to stop because I can't do anything while you're doing something. We have just an electricity problem, which we're solving right now. Okay. You see, when we open our hearts that much, we become very vulnerable. We just become vulnerable. We feel vulnerable on all kinds of levels. As soon as the energy moves beyond what we feel that we can control with our little egos, then we feel very, very, very vulnerable. And that vulnerability is based on the need for the ego to be in control. Because once we step into a field of love bigger than we can control, it's not merely the fear of losing it, it's actually also the fear of giving it. A friend of mine once was having a great deal of trouble with someone in the community, and she wrote to Swamiji about how difficult he was and what should she do. And Swami wrote back, "He just wants to be your friend." And she responded, "Sir, I don't want to be that good." I don't want to be that good. I don't want to put out that much energy. I don't want the responsibility of doing that. And as a result, our fulfillment is also curtailed. Now, let me try to find the thoughts where I was. Just give me a moment here. I guess what I'm beginning to understand is Swami's capacity for bliss was based on his ability to love fearlessly. And his ability to love fearlessly was based on his trust in God. I remember myself being at a very critical juncture of having to make a decision about how much I opened myself and how much I committed. How much I allowed myself to become involved with the world. And I knew that there was a lot of danger in that commitment, because people and things are ever unreliable. Even if people are of good character and mean well, intend well, nobody knows what hidden karmic bombs we have. Nobody knows what other karmic imperatives will come. Nobody knows how long a life will last. We all know people, unfortunately, who've been subjected to terrible accidents. And suddenly everything that was perfect is not perfect anymore, because it turns out that the incarnation was not as long as it was meant to be. Or that beautiful child that you've longed for so long turns out not to be a karmic friend, but a karmic enemy, and comes into your home. A friend of mine, by the time I knew her, she had a really beautiful marriage. But the first 18 years of it, as she put it, were hell, because the one of the children was a karmic enemy. Master said sometimes you get people with whom you have very dissonant karma to fight it out in close quarters, is how he put it. So it took 18 years for that child to move out of the house, and then suddenly the marriage got better again. I mean, that is not a pretty story. But anyway, these things happen. But what I'm saying is, when I was faced on the edge of that, with which I knew what I was risking, and but I realized what I had to trust was not this world or other people. I had to use my discrimination and not involve myself in situations that were transparently foolish. But I also had to trust that if God broke my heart, He would also give me the strength to accept it. And on the other side of that acceptance would be the freedom that I was seeking. Just like that. This is why the Gita talks about the man of wisdom looks equally, at betrayal and loyalty, at death and life, at sickness and health. At the end of his life, toward the end of his life, Swami had to go into the hospital for some major operation. He used the phrase ripping his guts out, which was Swami rarely used language like that. Usually he would use a very refined phrase for something. But in this particular time, he referred to having his guts ripped out, which was sort of what the operation was, because it was in that part of his body. And he said, according to the Bhagavad Gita, and he quoted the verse, he said, I should feel the same about going out for a lovely evening with friends to a beautiful restaurant and going into the hospital and having my guts ripped out. He said, and I do. Because what is fulfillment? See, we think that fulfillment is having what we want. But real fulfillment is accepting what God gives us. And I use the word surrender when I think about this. Surrender is also a word I've not lived with all that much. I have a tremendous amount of willpower and a lot of creativity. So I tend not to observe the Sabbath. I tend to try to influence the world. And I find fulfillment by willpower, which is so strange, because that's a very important step on the spiritual path. It's a very important step to understand I can use my willpower to manifest, what I feel inspired to manifest. And that's why fulfillment comes first. We actually get what we want. Swami said, we learn from being disappointed, but we learn more from being fulfilled. Because if we're disappointed and don't get what we want, we imagine that it will satisfy it. So we have to have it. We get it completely. We have a beautiful 40-year marriage. We have wonderful children who stay with us till our last breath. We succeed beyond our wildest imaginings in being able to do what we do. And then our heart breaks because it's still not enough. Because at one point or another, everything changes and everything ends. And then we realize, there's a whole other, much bigger reality on the other side of it. And surrender then seems to me the right word, not because we're giving up, but we're surrendering the need to control it ourselves. We're realizing that if God sends it to me, it's what I want. Why would I not want it? Swamiji was sick once with a terrible flu. Fevers and chills, and he had some of us over there just because he liked to have us over. I was reading to him I think I was reading from him, could it have been The Robe, the novel The Robe? I was reading a novel out loud to him, and Shivani came over. She walks up towards Swamiji. He was stretched out in bed and shivering under the covers, and Swami said, don't come close to me. He said I might be contagious. Shivani said, if you have it, sir, I want it. Just like that. And she walked up right next to him and knelt next to him and took his hand. But I always thought it, if you have it, I want it. But it's the other way also. If you give it to me, Lord, that's what I want. I'll tell you how I feel. And I'll curl up in your arms in my broken heart. And you will hear me weep like you've never heard me weep. But on the other side of that is, if it wasn't for my eternal freedom, you wouldn't have sent it to me. Fulfillment, heartbreak, surrender. And then the last word would be bliss. You see, that's what I saw in Swamiji. This unfathomable bliss that coexisted with the most tender-hearted experience of every dimension of life, but the capacity not merely to affirm, but actually to know God in the midst of it. That's where we're heading, friends. It's not an easy journey, but it's the only journey worth making. And by the grace of God, we put our foot on the path, and all we have to do is keep walking. God bless you.